Today on Cruiseman's Garage, the third in a series of videos where I am adding my favorite accessories to this 2026 Honda Goldwing Tour. Today we're going to put on the Pathfinder LED lighting distribution hub so I can power all those accessories, and we're going to do a whole lot more. Hey everybody, welcome back to Cruiseman's Garage. The first thing I'm going to do today is I'm going to install this Pathfinder LED lighting distribution hub. You can see that I'm placing it underneath the fuel pump wire. Now these two wires on each end are the ones that are going to go back to the saddlebag connectors. This lighting distribution hub protects your CAN bus electrical system. So if you're adding lights or accessories to your Goldwing, I think it's absolutely essential. Now down here are the three power cables that are going to go to the battery and to the accessory terminal on the fuse box. The black, of course, is the ground, goes to the ground. The green will go to the accessory terminal on the fuse box. The red, of course, goes to the positive terminal on the battery. Now while I'm at it, I'm also going to be installing this little traction battery terminal extender. I think this is necessary because if you ever do need to jump start your Goldwing, it's very difficult to get to that positive battery terminal. This makes it much easier. First, let's remove the fuse box cover by pressing these two tabs on each side and pulling it out. This shows you kind of a diagram of all the different fuses. There's also some spare fuses on the inside of the cover, as well as a fuse pulling tool. But we don't need that right now. We're going to remove the top accessory screw. That's the positive terminal. I'm removing it right now. Now I have loosened this previously using a number 2 JIS screwdriver. Very important because sometimes these screws are in very, very tight from the factory, and you can very easily strip out the head of these screws. And what I'm going to do is simply attach this green ring terminal on the green wire to that, and then just put the screw back in. There is a little carved out slot on the side of the fuse box that the wire can stick out of, and that will allow the fuse box cover to fit flush when you put it back in place. So now I'm ready to attach the red or the positive cable from the Pathfinder lighting distribution hub. I am, of course, using that traction battery extender, and it makes it much easier to actually get threaded in and to install than that smaller screw. So this traction battery terminal extender does not have a slot for a screwdriver in the end, so you do need to use a 10mm socket. And now we're ready to connect the ground from the Pathfinder lighting distribution hub to the ground terminal on the battery. Now I'm going to route all of these wires underneath the frame to make sure they're tidy and out of the way. And now I'm ready to go ahead and hook up the Pathfinder lighting distribution hub. Here I'm hooking up the right side saddlebag connector. I've already installed the saddlebag connectors on the bike. I've got videos on how to install this Pathfinder lighting distribution hub. I'll put a link up in the corner of this video if you want to see it, and in the description. Have a complete video on how to install this. And then I'm going to connect up the left side saddlebag connector. And once I do that, we can start plugging accessories into this Pathfinder hub and test out, make sure everything works. You may remember in the last video I installed the cowl lights and the Muth signal mirrors, and all those wires are already up here under the seat, so all we have to do is plug them in. First I'm going to install the front left cowl light, and then I will install the left side Muth mirror. Next, I'm going to install the connector for that center tail light that we installed. It sits right above the license plate, and I'm just kind of routing that connector and hiding the excess wire kind of down by the frame so it's not going to get hit when I install the seat. It's not going to get pressed on anything. Then next we're going to plug in the right side cowl light and the right side Muth signal mirror. Those go on the front bank, the front right bank of that Pathfinder lighting distribution hub. And then we'll give everything a test, see what's working. So here you can see how I've routed my power cables that go to the battery. I wish that power cable, that red cable, is a little bit shorter, but maybe I can get Pathfinder to do that in the future. It doesn't need to be as long as it is. And it's a good idea to have that Pathfinder lighting distribution hub sitting up straight with the ports kind of facing forward as opposed to facing up. You don't want the seat to accidentally mash down on any of those wires. Okay, now for the moment of truth. Let's see if everything's working. I do see a green LED on the Pathfinder hub. That's a good sign. That means it's getting its power. Let's check out the turn signals. We'll check the left turn signals first. We have the Muth signal mirrors working, and my left cowl light turn signals are also working. Next, we're going to install my favorite accessory, and this is the Pathfinder LED multifunction spoiler. It's got a tail light, a brake light, a modulating brake light, and sequential turn signals. And as you can see, this one is custom painted to match the metallic black on my 2026 Goldwing. My friend Dale took this to one of his painter friends and had this custom painted. Thank you, Dale. So we're going to get started by removing the passenger backrest. We have 6 screws underneath the trunk lid that we need to remove. There's also a smaller screw underneath each of the armrests on the side of the passenger backrest. We have to remove the passenger backrest before we can remove the trunk lid. And we have to remove the trunk lid because we have to disassemble the trunk lid so that we can install the spoiler and all the wiring that goes with it. Once again, I want to remind you, this is not a how-to video. I have a video in my maintenance video series that shows how to remove all of these different parts. In fact, I have multiple videos, and I have a video on YouTube that shows how to mount and install this multifunction spoiler from Pathfinder LED. I will put a graphic and a link up in the upper right hand corner of this video if you're interested in watching that. I'm just going through and showing you some of the steps of what I'm doing on this 2026 Goldwing. Now here, I always put down a towel before I remove the trunk lid because I don't want to get the paint damaged or scratched. So my plan is once I remove this trunk lid is I'll put it on that towel, that soft surface to work on it. Removing the trunk lid as a one-person operation is actually pretty easy. You just want to make sure you always leave one bolt on each side of the trunk lid. You don't want to remove all 3 bolts on one side and then start on the other. Otherwise, that one side you removed all the bolts on will droop down and it will start putting tension and could damage your trunk lid. So you always leave, I like to leave the upper inside bolt on each side. And when I'm ready to remove those last 2 bolts, one on each side, I want to make sure my hand is in this position holding that trunk lid, because once I remove this last bolt, there's nothing holding the weight of the right side of the trunk. So I want to make sure that I'm holding it steady and not allowing that side of the trunk lid to drop down and put pressure on that remaining bolt on the left side. And then carefully walk around while holding the trunk lid with the other hand, and then I'll remove that final bolt. And once you remove that final bolt, you'll notice the trunk lid is a little back heavy. So be prepared for when the trunk lid comes off, it's going to feel heavier at the rear of the trunk. So just be prepared for that. Next, it's time to flip the trunk lid over onto the painted surface. That's why we have the towel. And this has to be done so we can now disassemble the liner of the trunk from the shell of the trunk. Now for the fun part that everybody loves, and that's drilling holes into those little trunk panels that we're going to remove. Pathfinder LED gives you this template. We're going to cut these out, and then we'll place them in the appropriate places inside the underside, I should say, of these little trunk panels before we drill our holes. I also like to put some masking tape on the painted surface just to help to prevent any of the paint from flaking off from the drill. Now I'm going to use a pick to mark the surface where I'm going to start drilling my holes. I'll be using a step bit for this. We have to drill they say 8.5 millimeters. I don't have an 8.5 millimeter bit, but I do have an 8 millimeter. And then on the larger hole on the right side is a 10 millimeter. So we're going to drill 2 8 millimeter and 1 10 millimeter. And I've always found that 8 millimeters is more than enough. It's basically what the little mounting posts on the spoiler are going to slip through so that we can mount them from underneath. You can see the little mark that pick makes in the plastic. And that's also kind of like a pilot hole for these step bits. I don't even need to drill a small pilot hole. I can usually use the indentation of the pick. I'm using my smallest step bit, which goes all the way up to 12 millimeter. But you can see the markings on the side. They're a little rusty, but I'm going to go to 8 millimeter on the smaller holes, which are on the corners of the trunk pieces. And then you notice I put some blue masking tape on the wood. That's just to further protect the painted surface. I'm going to start drilling this hole. I'm not even using a pilot hole. I'm just going to use that indentation. Once it goes through into the wood, I'll just hold that piece of plastic up with my hand. You just want to be careful you don't get your finger in the way of that drill bit. Sure, you've heard me say it before, but these little step bits are the best thing you can use for drilling through this plastic because it makes a beautifully smooth hole. And here I decided to turn the trunk panel over on the other side and finish out drilling the hole from the painted surface side rather than from the inside. And what we end up with on the left side is a beautifully smooth 8 millimeter hole in that trunk panel. I'm going to speed up the video so you don't have to sit there and watch me drill 2 more holes in the plastic, but basically I'm going to finish out the right side with the 8 millimeter and the 10 millimeter hole. I'm also going to flip my towel over to the other side. I don't want any of those plastic shavings from the drilling to potentially scratch the paint on my trunk lid. And now we'll put the trunk lid back down and we'll start mounting this spoiler. Here I'm just screwing down those trunk panels, putting them back in position. So I like to start with a test fit just to see how everything looks. We're feeding these 2 connectors and the wire through that 10 millimeter hole. And then there are 2 small posts on the bottom of the spoiler that fit into those 8 millimeter holes. Now there's a big, huge adhesive strip on the bottom of this spoiler, but before I take that cover off that adhesive, I want to make sure everything fits good. And it looks good. I've never had one that didn't fit right. It looks perfect. And this is what it's going to look like once we finally get it mounted. So here's that large 3M adhesive double-sided tape strip I was talking about earlier. Basically going to cut a little slot in that adhesive backing so that we can peel it back make a little corner that we can grab once we get the spoiler in place, and that will allow us to remove the remainder of this backing after we have the spoiler down on top of the trunk lid. Now there's also 2 little adhesive strips on each of those little wing tips, and they're painted. You can't see them right now because the painter did not mask those off, so they're painted the color of the paint job on the spoiler. So we'll have to peel those back as well. Now it's time to flip this spoiler over and remove our little protective rag. And now I'm just lining up those posts with those 8mm holes and punching those through the trunk. Once I do that, I'll start pressing down on the center of the spoiler to connect that adhesive tape that's exposed to the trunk. And then I can start with my little tabs I created. I can start pulling out that adhesive backing and pressing down on the rest of the spoiler. And I should also mention, I forgot to mention this, I did clean this trunk lid with alcohol before doing this. That way you get much better adhesion. I failed to mention that step, but I cleaned it thoroughly with alcohol. So now I'm removing that backing, and it is sticking down. I will carefully press from the center out, and I'm doing this before I take the adhesive tape off those little wingtips. Once I remove that tape from those little wingtips, I press down on each one of those firmly and kind of hold it there, usually for 30 to 45 seconds, and then I'll do the same thing with the center of the spoiler. I'll press down on the spoiler just to make sure I'm holding it in place to get good adhesion. Now we can flip the trunk lid over again and install the little screws and washers. These actually go into those little posts that go through those 8mm holes in the trunk panels. And this is just an extra measure to hold that spoiler in place. Now before I reinstall the trunk lid, I'm going to go ahead and remove the trunk side panel because we have to route the wires down through that side to get it up under the seat. And again, I have a video that shows how to do all of this. Now I'm just reinstalling the lid liner into the trunk lid. And you'll notice I also installed a trunk light. I didn't show that part of the process, but again, I have a video that shows how to do that as well. I was able to talk Ricky into helping me put the trunk lid back on. You can do it as a one-man job. I've done it before, but it's a lot easier if you have a helper just to hold one side of the trunk in place, or the lid in place, while you get the first couple of screws started. Makes it a little easier. Once you get the first 2 screws in, it'll pretty much stay up on its own. So now I'm routing the wires down from the trunk lid to under the seat. Now I'm also routing this trunk sub harness you can see here, in addition to the Pathfinder LED spoiler wire. I'm just doing them both at the same time because it's easier. And here I've got that trunk sub harness connector hooked up to the bike, and we'll tuck it out of the way, and then we'll check to see if our trunk light works. Of course it does. Now let's check out that new Pathfinder LED multifunction spoiler. I think it looks super cool. If you guys enjoyed this video, do me a big favor, give it a thumbs up, because that really does help my YouTube rankings. I think I have one more video coming of a few little things I'm going to add to this bike, so I appreciate you sticking with me, and thanks again for all your support.